All right, guys, with week one of the NFL rapidly approaching and preseason just around the corner, it is time for us here at Twin Takes Fantasy Football to release our official rankings for the upcoming 2023 season for redraft. We're going to go ahead and break down every fantasy relevant position from wide receiver to running back to quarterback to tight end and give you our projections for each of the top players at each position. There's been a huge summer of offseason moves from trades to the draft to free agency signings. So this is going to be a good way to dive into all those top prospects, kind of see how they rank up and arm you with enough information to win one of the most integral parts of fantasy football, and that's going to be the draft. So as always, like the video, comment down below what you think of these rankings, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I'll see you on the side of that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football, and as I mentioned on the other side of that little musical break there, over the next 2 weeks we are breaking down the top players at each fantasy football position: wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, and quarterbacks. Today we're starting off with my favorite position for fantasy, which is going to be wide receiver. I've kind of said ad nauseum on this channel that that's the shift that we're seeing in the NFL to a more pass-heavy offense, that we're seeing wide receivers become more of the integral part of fantasy. I've been very vocal about this year in the draft. You want to be targeting wide receivers in the first few rounds to really build the core of your team around. So I think that this might just be the most important rankings we do this entire offseason. But we're going to go over not 10, not 15, but 20, the top 20 wide receivers in this class. We're going to rank them and go over their projected ranks, their projected ADP based off of Sleeper, their finish last year, where we see them ranging, and then just basically kind of give you all this information so you have a good idea of each prospect going into the draft and you can make the best decision. And we'll give you kind of that idea of if the ADP right now is worth it or if it's not worth it. I do want to go ahead and say these rankings are for a single quarterback half PPR league. I do believe half PPR is the most popular game format for fantasy football at the moment, so that's how these rankings are based, how all these ADPs are based. If you have any more questions about format or how I use to base these ADPs or these calculations, feel free to tag me in the comments below. I'll try to answer them. Without further ado, again, this is a long list, 20 wide receiver prospects. So let's jump into it. We'll try to give you, 3 major bullet points on each and keep this video rolling. So the first guy is not going to surprise anyone at all. It is the clear 101. Not only at the wide receiver position, but in fantasy drafts overall, it's going to be Justin Jefferson. Like I said, he's 101. Last year's finish was the wide receiver one as well. So there's a lot of ones going on around Justin Jefferson, and he's absolutely earned that rating and that hype around him just for how good he is. He averaged the second highest points per game of any wide receiver last year at 17.9. And he's just, dominant. I mean, when you talk about wide receiver that has it all, this is Justin Jefferson. He's the true alpha X wide receiver prototype that you're looking for. Great route runner, great after the catch ability, very low drop rate. I mean, I don't need to tell you guys this guy's the best wide receiver in the NFL, and he is my current pick for the 101 overall. You still have Kirk Cousins there. You still have Kevin O'Connell, who's a very offensive-minded head coach, and I think even with the addition of Addison's really going to eat into TJ Hawkinson's target share, not really Justin Jefferson. And frankly, the addition of Addison, I think, should free up Justin Jefferson a little bit more, drawing away some of that double coverage that he was pressed with for 99% of the games last year. So Justin Jefferson, absolutely smash 101 pick. Moving on to our wide receiver 2. And something I did forget to mention, and I apologize about this, is that I'm going to list the tiers. So, a lot of people when it comes to draft strategy like to, bring tier-based strategies to the drafts. So when you get to the end of the second round, you'll see your tier 2 running backs versus your tier 2 wide receivers. And let's say all of your tier 2 wide receivers are gone and you still see one of your tier 2 running backs left. You can go ahead and take that because you can see there's still tier 2 value left on the board instead of reaching for a player that's a tier 3 wide receiver. So obviously right now we're still in tier 1. There's going to be 3 players in tier 1. And I do know that Twitter is a dying social media app, but it's still the easiest way for me to get information out for you. So if you're more of a visual learner, if you want more of a concise list and visually see all these tiers and how they break down, right after this video is posted, I'll go onto my Twitter and post a thread of my top 20 wide receivers, ranking them from 1 to 20 is also the tiers that they fall in for my particular fancy. So go ahead and check that out there at Twin Takes FF. It'll be linked in the description below. So as we continue into tier one, second wide receiver, again, to no one's surprise. I don't think we're going to have many surprises here with the first 5 or 6 guys, but it's going to be Jamar Chase. He did finish at the wide receiver 12 last year, but that was because he missed 4 to 5 games with an injury. Again, still an absolute elite wide receiver when you look at his average points per game, as he put up 15.2 points per game last year, and is absolutely deserving of his current ADP, which is the 103 and the wide receiver 2 in his class. I personally be fine taking him at the 102. Again, I'm very big advocate of taking wide receivers very high in the first 2 rounds, so I'm taking him over Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler at this point. As I've made very clear in many mock drafts that have been posted on this channel, he's tied to Joe Burrow. He's a top 3 quarterback for sure, maybe top 2, or maybe he's a second or third based on your particular feelings about Josh Allen, but no one can deny that Joe Burrow is great. Even with T. Higgins there, we've seen Jamar Chase be incredibly successful. He is the alpha wide receiver, has that LSU connection with Joe Burrow, and just does things after the catch that are truly special and unique. We've seen him be absolutely game wrecker for fantasy the past 2 years, and I don't see that slowing down any bit. Again, I do like to mention the fact that he came back from that hip injury quite quickly last year, and it didn't seem to really slow him down at all. And the official report about why he came back in 4 weeks instead of 6 was, I think the doctor still just wrote, he's built different. I mean, that was literally on the medical exam. So, I mean, yeah, I'm going to buy in the fact that Jamar Chase is built different. He is a truly elite talent, the wide receiver, and absolutely deserving of the number 2 spot as a wide receiver. Here, moving on, number 3. I know he's recovering from injury, but it's going to be Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's going to round out our tier 1 wide receivers. I believe Jefferson, Chase, and Kupp are all in a tier of their own. They're absolutely elite wide receivers, and why I still believe, despite the injury, that Kupp is a tier 1 wide receiver and is worthy of honestly going at the 103 spot is because he had the highest average points per game last year at 18.2 points. If you're putting up an average of 18.2 points per game, that is absolutely ridiculous. He still is Matt Stafford, and honestly, it's going to have to be a more offensive-centric focus when it comes to the play calling with the LA Rams this upcoming year. They lost Jalen Ramsey. They lost a bunch of their defense. Their defense will be absolutely abysmal. So we know that Matthew Stafford's going to have to throw the ball. They're going to have to be more aggressive on offense. And what better way than to further proliferate the relationship he has with Cooper Kupp? I think Cooper Kupp has the opportunity to return to that wide receiver 1 position that he enjoyed just 2 short years ago when he won Offensive Player of the Year. He did finish as wide receiver 24 last year, but again, that was due to the injury. But it doesn't really concern me. It wasn't a very large injury. It was kind of a fluky injury that a lot of the medics around the NFL have said that it's not something that's indicative of a re-injury. And also, he could have come back late in the season, but because of the way that the Rams season was going, they decided to just hold him out, let him get healthy, so he should be absolutely 100% coming into the 2023 season. Current ADP is at the 105. He's a wide receiver 3. I'm taking him at the 103. Again, wide receiver greater than running back in my opinion. Moving on to our wide receiver 4. Still haven't really deviated from, consensus at this point, if I could spell Tyreek's name correctly. Tyreek Hill. This is funny because I was kind of out on Tyreek Hill last year, and I totally accept that I was wrong on Tyreek. That was one of my biggest screw-ups last year, was being out on Tyreek, and I totally accept that. But, the name of the game in fantasy and the way to win is to accept that you're wrong and to be able to have your perspective challenged and change your opinions. He was incredible last season. He finished as the wide receiver 3 overall, even with Tua missing quite a significant number of games. It just goes to show that Tyreek Hill can get it done with any number of play caller under center, whether it's Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes, Skylar Thompson, Teddy Bridgewater, Tua. He's absolutely dominant. He averaged 16.6 points per game last year, which is an absolute elite number. He's currently being drafted at the 106 ADP, which I honestly think is a very fine ADP for him. I'm taking him kind of at that 105, 106 area. Maybe Christian McCaffrey goes a little bit ahead of him, but I'm definitely taking him over a Travis Kelce. And he's the wide receiver 4, according to Sleeper. And the reason why I'm changing my tune on Tyreek Hill was last season I was wrong. I thought he was just a speedster. I thought he was a product of Patrick Mahomes. I thought he was a product of inconsistency that we had seen proliferate his production throughout his years in Kansas City. And with him being 29, turning 30 during this season, I thought that speed was going to drop off. I was incredibly wrong. He was able to put up consistent production throughout any of the snafus that were thrown at him by the Miami Dolphins with all 3 different quarterbacks. And I think my hot take with Tyreek is that even if he loses a step in his speed, obviously that's what makes him an elite trait one of his elite traits, but I think he does have elite catching. He has just a ridiculous ability to snag the ball out of the air and secure the ball. Very, very low drop rate, and especially with someone as a little bit inaccurate as Tua was, and obviously with Teddy and Skyler, you saw on full display Tyreek's ability to catch an errant ball, bring it down, not really even break stride, and continue to get yards after the catch. I think his yak ability and his just pure prowess at catching the ball and snagging it and holding on to it is something that's elite. So even if he does lose a step in speed, I am confident in Tyreek Hill being an elite wide receiver. He is a guy that I'm confident taking at the 5th position in drafts at this moment. And the 104, I'm going to say, is a bit of a steal right now. People taking him in the second half of the first round are going to be very, very pleasantly surprised with Tyreek. I think he's an excellent wide receiver. Moving on to wide receiver number 5. Again, not deviating too far from consensus, is going to be Stefan Diggs. He finished as the wide receiver 4 last year, currently is ranked as the wide receiver 5. And where I find this is just being, again, a little bit of an issue or a discrepancy with the ADP is his ADP falls from Tyreek Hill at 106 to Stefan Diggs at 111. I don't understand why an elite talent at wide receiver like Stefan Diggs is falling all the way to the end of the first round. It is absolutely ludicrous in my mind. Maybe it's just my opinion about how wide receivers, that they're more valuable for fantasy this year than running backs. But Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, these guys that are currently have a higher ADP than Stefan Diggs, I just don't see it. Everything around him points to having elite production. He was incredible last year with an average points per game of 15.7. And there really wasn't anything on offense that's going to take away from Stefan Diggs' production. There's been a lot of turmoil around him. It might have scared some people off. It might have dropped his ADP down to 111, but I personally am not worried. He didn't report to the first game of training camp, but he is a veteran. It's not uncommon for veterans to miss that first day of OTAs, and obviously he came in the very next day, kind of quashed all the rumors that he was unhappy. He's a part of this team. He has a great connection with Josh Allen, and they didn't add a wide receiver in the draft until the 4th round with a wide receiver, Justin Shorter out of Florida. Don't think he's going to be a really big threat. Obviously we saw last year that Gabe Davis isn't going to be a huge target threat to Stefan Diggs, and I know they brought in Dalton Kincaid in the first round. I almost said Dalton Schultz there. Too many tight ends named Dalton. They brought in Dalton Kincaid, but historically, I understand the comps to Travis Kelce. I understand his pass catching prowess, but he is an older prospect. He is 25 years old, and the last 25-year-old tight end we saw come in the NFL was Hayden Hurst, and that really didn't work out well. Also, we've seen that historically, even with the Travis Kelce and type player, it takes them 2 years to become truly effective at the pass catching position at the tight end. Just tight ends historically are not good their rookie year. I understand that most people are viewing Dalton Kincaid as an outlier, and I'm not against outliers. I mean, if there's a person who's been an outlier, I'm willing to bet on their talent. I want to do it again. I'm just not projecting players to become outliers. So I don't want to bet on Dalton Kincaid to become an outlier at the tight end position and really snag away a lot of the receiving work for Stefan Diggs. Also, what we're going to see, especially out of training camp with Dalton Kincaid's routes that he's running, they're going to be short to intermediate. They're not really going to be taking away from a lot of the target share that Stefan Diggs commands. So he still should be an alpha in that Bills offense, and is, a guy that if he's there at the end of the first round at the 110, 111, 112 spot, it's an auto pick for me. Moving on to our wide receiver 6. And still within consensus at this moment. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. Again, another guy that I think has shown last year was a really, really big breakout year for CeeDee. And I think that, even with the offensive coordinator change, with Kellen Moore leaving, that does cause a little bit of concern. But just with the absolute dominant force that CeeDee Lamb was last year, I'm not that concerned. If we go over some of his metrics, he was the wide receiver 6 last year, currently projected as a wide receiver 6. I think that's fine. He might be being drafted a little bit as his ceiling, but I think he has such a high floor and such an easily replicable ceiling that I don't think drafting him at his ceiling is the worst idea in the world. He averaged 14.6 points per game last year. Again, getting into that elite number, obviously you want to see above 15 to have an absolute elite metric, but he had a little bit of slow start to the season, had a lot of poor games in correlation with Cooper Rush being the quarterback. So if we take out those first 4 games and only take the sample size with Dak as the quarterback, he did achieve an over 15 point per game average and did hit that elite mark. At the end of at the beginning of the first round, his current ADP is 201. I think that's totally fine. Honestly, if you want to take him at the end of the first round, I'm okay with him being your wide receiver 1. Again, with Schottenheimer coming in, we do see the fact that they want to run the ball. They want to slow down the offense a little bit more. That's great. That's a great narrative going into the offseason. But if you look at the weapons and you look at the moves and the money that Jerry's invested in this offense, I don't think people are going to see this team as a massive run-heavy team the way that people are envisioning it. They brought in Brandon Cooks. Michael Gallup is 2 years removed from the ACL injury, and you still have CeeDee Lamb. I think he's going to just be commanding targets left, right, and center. He'll have well over 120 targets and he'll have enough volume to sustain him as a very clear wide receiver 1 for fantasy football. Again, drafting a little bit as your ceiling, but I don't want to jinx it, but I do think he's a really, really safe prospect with the volume and also being attached to, it's hard to say that the Cowboys are one of the more dynamic offenses and one of the more prolific offenses in the NFC, but with the state of the current NFC, they're going to be putting up a lot of points, and I think CeeDee Lamb will be a great beneficiary of that. Moving in to our 7th ranked wide receiver here. This is where we really deviate from consensus. Is going to be DK Metcalf. Now, here are a lot of numbers that are going to be concerning. He is currently listed as the wide receiver 15 based on Sleeper. His current ADP is at the end of the 3rd round at the 309 pick. He was wide receiver finished as the wide receiver 18 in 2022, and he only averaged 10.6 points per game. But I am really, really in on Stefan Diggs. We saw a little bit of really on DK Metcalf. We saw a down year from Stefan Diggs 2 years ago. And people would say, that one great season was an outlier. But, touchdown fluctuations come and go, especially with wide receivers. But again, some of the things I said about CeeDee Lamb hold true with DK Metcalf. He's going to be an absolute dominant alpha wide receiver. At one point, he was considered to be the future of fantasy football, and I don't think that is going to be changing. And he's just going to be, while the Seattle offense isn't prolific, it's not one of the best top 10 offenses you think when you think of a Bills or a Bengals or a Chargers. It's still an offense that, compared to the rest of the NFC, is going to be putting up a lot of points, and I think DK is going to be a major beneficiary of that. Yes, I know they drafted Zach Charbonnet, and Pete Carroll's always been one of those guys to establish the run, but DK Metcalf is going to have his own. He has his own really niche role cut out in that offense. There's really no other prototypical X wide receivers like him. At 6'4", 235 pounds, he is kind of a unicorn when it comes to the wide receiver position in the NFL. They did draft Jackson Smith-Njigba in the 1st round, but with the type of targets that DK Metcalf commands, I don't think Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to really eat into that target share. Jackson Smith-Njigba is more of a negative impact on Tyler Lockett's role in this offense rather than DK Metcalf. And I think Jackson Smith-Njigba, same way that Addison opens things up more for Justin Jefferson, JSN will open up things more for DK Metcalf. And the final point I want to make is, we look at last year, we look at his touchdowns, he's going to regress towards mean. He's an absolute insane threat when it comes, just with his height and size and build, when it comes to the red zone. Rookie season 7, 10, 12, drops down to 6 touchdowns, and he just wasn't getting the touchdown. He just wasn't hauling in the touchdowns or wasn't getting really good looks in the end zone. Despite this, DK Metcalf was the 2nd highest targeted wide receiver in the red zone, but only pulled in 6 touchdowns. I expect that target rate to remain similar, but I expect the touchdowns to absolutely ramp up. I'm expecting 13 to 14 touchdowns for DK Metcalf this season, definitely a double-digit number, and it's going to propel him into the top 10 wide receiver rankings right here at 309. It's an absolute steal. DK Metcalf has been on every single team I've drafted, and I cannot recommend highly enough going out and snatching him for all of your fantasy football teams. He's a guy that's going to be just absolute. People are wondering why he fell to the 3rd round at the end of this season. Moving on to wide receiver 8 is going to be a guy that, where is he? Oh, I think it's Devonta. There you go. Spelling is hard, guys. Devonta Adams for the Raiders. Again, he's a guy that he finished as the wide receiver 2 last year. In the previous seasons, he finished as the wide receiver 3 and then the wide receiver 1 before that in 2021. Obviously a guy that was looked at as the consensus best wide receiver in the league for a very long stretch of time. And despite being on the wrong side of 30, he's still a guy that does have that precision route running. He wasn't a guy that really incorporated speed into his game. And he wasn't an athletic guy that's going to have a very massive impact from losing that athleticism on the wrong side of 30. He's a guy that, had drop issues, but really corrected that. He has a very, very low drop rate, very, very secure point of catch, and very, very precise route running. Honestly, one of the best, if not the best route runner in the NFL. And it was very productive for him last year. He finished with 16.8 average points per game and finished as the wide receiver 2 for fantasy football. This year, him being drafted as the wide receiver 8 is absolutely unfathomable to me. Despite him being ranked as the wide receiver 8 here as well, I do have some concerns, which is why, he does sink down to that 8th position. The age, certainly. The state of the Raiders, it's an organization that's just dysfunctional, and we've seen how dysfunctional organizations, despite no fault of the players into themselves, just, that negative culture and the negative energy just radiates throughout the organization. We've seen a lot of inconsistency from the Raiders offense, especially this past year. And I think going from Derek Carr to Jimmy G is basically a bit of the same, if not a downgrade. In my personal opinion, Derek Carr is a better quarterback than Jimmy G, especially when it comes to throwing the deep ball and getting Devontae Adams the ball. So I just don't think the way that Jimmy Garoppolo plays the game, it's going to be conducive to a lot of deep balls or a lot of, explosive plays for Devontae Adams. He's going to really target the short to intermediate route of the game. It's going to be, beneficial for guys like Jacoby Myers, Hunter Renfrow if he stays on the team, Michael Mayer, but it's just going to really eat into the Devontae Adams target share. And I frankly am not super convinced at Josh McDaniels' prowess as a head coach. So we know the talent is there in Devontae Adams. I do love betting on talent, but there are certain things around the organization, around the coach, and around the quarterback that do concern me with Devontae Adams. Not enough that I wouldn't take him as, my wide receiver 1. If you want to go ahead and if you're really sold and maybe a high-end running back like a Bijan falls to the end of the first round and you step up on Bijan and you come back around with Devontae Adams in the second round, I'm very, very okay with that. I wouldn't draft him in the first round, but top of the second round I think is very fitting for Devontae Adams' value as it currently stands. All right, now we're going to move on to my wide receiver 9 of this list. And with this guy, he's going to round out our tier 2 of our wide receiver rankings. Yes, I know. I've been pretty bad about mentioning which tiers were the break. I was really good with tier 1, and then after that, I completely forgot. That's why I'm going to be putting this out on Twitter, so it's very easily visually representative of what my tiers are. Just to recap, CeeDee Lamb through AJ Brown, who is wide receiver number 9 for me, is going to be tier 2. I do have Tyreek Hill and Stefan Diggs in their own little 1.5 tier. I think they're good. They're just a little bit outside of the tier 1 of Kupp, Chase, and Jefferson, but they're I can't put them in the wide receiver 2 group. They're better than the tier 2 group. So AJ Brown rounds out tier 2. I'm gonna try to be a little bit unbiased when talking about this guy. Try to be, come as a logical, rational, third-party perspective to fantasy football. And I think I actually am with this ranking. According to Sleeper, he is a wide receiver 7. He finished as the wide receiver 5 last year, averaging 15.0 fantasy points per game. But I have him ranked as my wide receiver 9. Just a couple concerns when it has to A.J. Brown. He's currently being drafted at the 112 spot at the end of the first round, which I don't think is egregious. I mean, when we go and look at, for a second, and we talk about this 1-2 turn, I've been very vocal again, ad nauseum. Take wide receivers in the first 2 rounds. I mean, if you're sitting around the 110 to the 203, if you can stack, guys like a Stefan Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, Stefan Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown, any of those 4 guys you can stack at this value right here, I'm extremely happy with leaving the draft in that regard. So again, I do value DK Metcalf highly, but again, he's a guy that, you're trying to get the value of him later on in the 3rd round. You don't want to overreach. I'm just, going to highlight his value and where I think he projects. But, there's a lot of alpha wide receiver talent here at the end of the first round for you to snatch up if you miss out on the tier 1 guys here at the top. So back to AJ Brown. I do think he's adequately priced right now at the 112. Again, I said I would take him absolutely there at the top of the 2nd round. But why I'm a little lower on him is just because he's tied to an Eagles offense that's so volatile. And not in the way that you're expecting. Yes, it's number 2 in offensive efficiency when it comes to the NFL. They're second behind the Kansas City Chiefs, but there's just so many weapons to go around. They have Jalen Hurts, who's honestly their primary running back. He operates like a Josh Allen. They have Devonta Smith, who is an incredible receiver in his own right. You have Dallas Goedert, who again, he's my number 3 tight end in both dynasty and redraft. You have a ton of options. They brought in both DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny to go along with Kenneth Gainwell and the running back. The running feature is hugely integral to not Shane Steichen, he's gone, but to the new offensive coordinator's role there in the Eagles, and obviously under Nick Sirianni. So again, when you just have such an array of weapons, it's going to be hard. You do have those blow-up games. Like I said, he's going to win you weeks solely by himself. He did average 15.0 fantasy points per game, which is an elite number, but there are going to be those games where, he's just not targeted, or it's going to be a very run-dominant strategy, or, he's a third pass catcher behind Vonta and Dallas Goedert. So there will be games that I do think he's not as safe a wide receiver as a DK, as a CD, as a Devonta Smith, which is why he's ranked lower than in my opinion. I also do think he gets a little bit of his touchdown upside vultured. Again, it's a team under Nick Sirianni that really features the run game, especially when you have such an incredible quarterback like Jalen Hurts. You have that double cheek push, the 1 yard rushes that, they converted 31 out of 32 of those, which is an incredibly impressive number. And, I'm going to go on a tangent here, but it's okay. I'll stay on track. They try to ban, or some people brought up at the owners meeting to ban the double cheek push because it's just such a cheat code. I don't think it's a cheat code. I think it's the fact that Jalen Hurts is actually he's a power lifter. He's a guy that can actually squat 600 pounds. We saw in the Super Bowl that they tried to do a double cheek push and Chris Jones jumped over top of the offensive line. If that was Kirk Cousins, he would have crumpled to the ground right away. But because Jalen Hurts is that athletic, can squat 600 pounds, he's able to stay on his feet and then push forward into the end zone. I think it's truly an athletic feat to be able to accomplish that over and over again. But because that's so effective, because it's such a quote-unquote cheat code, when you get into the goal-to-go areas, because of how stout that offensive line is, because of how good it is with Landon Dickerson, Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, and whoever takes over for Isaac Seumalo, it's going to be a very run-dominant thing. So it's going to steal a lot of the touchdown upside from A.J. Brown unless he gets, a pass from 15, 20, 25 yards out. I mean, the one good thing I will say about A.J. Brown is, they did lose a lot of defensive pieces. They lost Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They lost T.J. Edwards. They lost Javon Hargraves. So maybe the defense does regress a little bit so they're not kind of forced into that, dominate the team in the first half and just run out the clock in the second half. Maybe they do have to pass a little bit more. Maybe they do have to be more offensively engaged throughout the entire game, which, could lead to more volume for A.J. Brown. But, it's still a dynamic offense. So, elite player, top tier talent, a little bit more volatile than the guys in tier 2, which is why he's at the end of tier 2. And now we're going to move on to tier 2.5. Two guys here that I want to mention that, they weren't good enough for me, in my opinion, to throw into that tier 2, but I do want to highlight them above tier 3, especially when you compare them to running backs. I think they are guys that have definitely more valuable in tier 3. So number 10 is going to be Garrett Wilson. And as I record this video, he was seen limping off of, they already have the questionable tag update. Sleeper is always on top of it. But, he was seen limping off of camp with ankle injury, lower leg injury. So, if that's a high ankle sprain, he might be out for the entirety of preseason, may not even be ready for week 1. But let's operate under the optimistic grounds that he will be back. I've talked about Garrett Wilson a lot this offseason. I am very trepidatious about his production when it comes to the New York Jets this season. You have Aaron Rodgers. Again, I get it. 2 years ago, MVP. 3 years ago, MVP. But last year, he was absolutely atrocious as a quarterback. And we see when it goes with quarterbacks, it typically tends to come swiftly, and it never really comes back. Just look at Russell Wilson last year. Everyone said, it was just a down year with the Seahawks. He's going to come back. He's going to be completely healed. Came back with the Broncos. Looked like absolute trash. So I think with Aaron Rodgers, given his age, it might just be going altogether. I don't know if he can reclaim that MVP form he had just 2 short years ago. Also, I'm very not high on Aaron Rodgers. I don't really condone his activity as a person. Yes, he might seem very charitable giving $35 million back to the Jets in order to, actually fuel the team around him. However, he is kind of a diva. We'll see how well he holds up underneath the scrutiny of the New York media, which has been, detrimental to a lot of stars, both NFL and other sports in the past. So we'll have to see how he holds up. The drama around that team could make this team implode. Also, we see everyone just assumes that he's going to step up and immediately target Garrett Wilson. There are certain things that I don't think Garrett Wilson's utilization will resemble Devontae Adams in Green Bay. First off, you have other guys like Randall Cobb and Allen Lazard coming into the offense with Aaron Rodgers, two guys he already has a very well-established relationship with. We know just based on the past that Aaron Rodgers tends to throw to guys that he trusts more. It takes a long time for him to build a rapport with new wide receivers. While it seems to be going well in training camp, he's still going to target those guys that he trusts when he gets into those very high pressure situations. That's going to be a Randall Cobb or an Allen Lazard. Also, Aaron Rodgers, just in the way that he operates around the red zone, he targets tight ends in the red zone at a rate double the average NFL quarterback. So, you're looking at, I know they don't have a strong tight end room. They still do have CJ Uzomah, who was injury riddled last year, but still a talented tight end. They brought in Zach Kuntz, who's very athletic. I think they could be utilized much more around the end zone. And also, you're looking at a offense from Robert Saleh, who comes from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, who's very, very predicated on running the ball. They have Breece Hall coming back from the ACL, and he might not be, 100%, but, he was an incredible running back when healthy to start the 2022 season. He will be back at some point this year, and apparently all recovery has been very positive throughout training camp so far this offseason. They also have Michael Carter. They have Zonovan Knight. They went out and drafted Izzy Abanikanda with a pretty substantial draft capital in the 4th round for a running back. So, it's a team that is very running back focused, and I think the running game is going to be a very, very integral part of the Jets offense, especially when it comes to a really, physical, brutal, and bruising division like the AFC East. So we'll have to see how that goes, but we're going to see a lot of, trying to control games through run with Robert Saleh, with how he likes to go. And with, when the touchdown or when you get to the goal line, it's going to be a lot of running plays. And I think that's going to vulture a little bit of Garrett Wilson's touchdown upside. Not saying he's going to be a great player. He's incredibly talented. I just have concerns, which is why I put him down here in 2.5. And the last 2.5, again, the tier. I'm being better about the tiers, I promise. My wide receiver 11, Jalen Waddle. First wide receiver who's not a alpha wide receiver 1. Typically, as I do these lists, I'm going to gravitate towards those dominant alpha wide receiver 1s. You'll notice as we go down this list a little bit further, there are some guys that, they're, in my mind, fall compared to ADP just because they are not the number 1 guy on their team. And I don't want to draft them as a wide receiver 1 on my team, or in a range that's going to be a wide receiver 1 on my team if they're not the wide receiver 1 even in their own team, which is, a lot more sparsely spread throughout the NFL. But Jalen Waddle, I think he's one of the few guys in the NFL that is a wide receiver 2, but that if you take him and put him on another team, he could be a dominant wide receiver 1. We've seen him in his 2 years in the NFL be absolutely terrific, both at a possession type of wide receiver role, as well as like that deep threat speedster. He has insane athletic ability. He has the speed to be a deep threat, and he saw that having the highest depth of target last year with about, I think it was like 18.2 ADOT. But then the year before, when he set the rookie record for receptions in a year, we saw him be more of that guy that, plays around the line of scrimmage, that has yards after catch, that controls the possession, is just more of a possession receiver. So we've seen him do it all. We see really no weakness in his game, and he, again, a guy that not only has the speed, but incredible ability to catch the ball, and the very, very precise route runner. Unlike Tyreek, though, why Tyreek is ranked so high, we've seen Tyreek do it with all kinds of quarterbacks. With Jalen Waddle, there's a very, very clear correlation that once Tua was off the field, it became much, much harder for Jalen Waddle to accrue fantasy points. The discrepancy between Teddy Bridgewater and Skylar Thompson throwing to Jalen Waddle versus Tua was absolutely incredible. But you can't deny Jalen Waddle's talent. He's gone out and he's had games. We're looking at games that he has 29 points, 28 points. I believe there's a 30-point game in here somewhere, or maybe I was mistaken. 28, 20, 29. Okay, maybe it was a 29-point game. But, he's a guy that can go out and absolutely dominate and win you a week, maybe a little bit more volatile, which is why he is sitting here in 2.5. But one of the more talented athletes when it comes to wide receiver, and on such a dynamic offense like the Miami Dolphins under offensive guru Mike McDaniels. It's a team that really prioritizes the pass, really prioritizes both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and we've seen him be, a very, very productive wide receiver. We just have to look at it last year. Not only was he a top 10 wide receiver, but he's wide receiver 7 when it came. He was wide receiver 7 overall for fantasy, despite being the wide receiver 2 on his team, and he did have a pretty good average points per game. Despite the volatility, he'd still average 13 points per game, which overall you would be very, very happy with. Right now, he's being taken at the 209. And aptly, This is another pick that I agree with consensus on. Wide receiver 11 here. He's my wide receiver 11. He's Sleeper's wide receiver 11. Right there at the end of the second round, I think is an absolute steal. Anywhere from 206 to 208, 210, 212. If he's falling to the third round, that's an absolute steal. That should never happen. But right there, that's an incredible value for a guy that can absolutely go out and win you a week. So that's 1 through 11 right now. If I'm looking at the timer, it's been 35 minutes. I understand that right now there's so much fantasy content going around. I don't want to sit here and talk for an hour and a half. So we're going to end it there. I think it's a really clear cutoff. We can talk about tier 3, tier 4, and then the honorable mentions next video. So it kind of evens out to like maybe 11 to 12 per video. But yeah, maybe we can do a little more longer form content in season. But right now I'm trying to, make these videos very palatable for, trying to fight for my little tiny market share of the fantasy community here on YouTube. So I hope you guys enjoyed the top 11 wide receivers. Stick around for part 2, where we'll talk about wide receiver 12 through probably 24, 25. We'll throw a few honorable mentions in there as well outside the top 20. But until then, guys, take care.